being taken into her service in the above capacity, he has charged the duties of his office to her entire satisfaction for the space of 3 years, traveling with her goods into Syria, Persia, and Egypt, and bringing back such advantageous returns as did not fail to please. In the course of his mercantile travels, he became acquainted both with Jews and Christians, whose religious opinions he would examine with as much attention as privacy would allow or opportunity afford. He found both parties, wherever he went, miserably divided among themselves, which he no doubt considered as a favorable symptom and a powerful encouragement to expect their speedy acceptance of that which he was soon to make public. When religious controversy rises to such a height as to extinguish every spark of love, confidence, and respect, and kindle a spirit of jealousy and persecution, men are almost prepared for the reception of anything if it promises a removal of their present calamities. Well, they actually weren't. People didn't convert but the controversies, the contradictions, the problems with ethics or science or whatever, it didn't start. It already had started before the Bible was written down, that some of these teachings didn't mesh with people. And if there's an absurdity, this guy should point out if something's not true and can be proven wrong. George Sale should have proven something wrong in the Quran. The want of unanimity has been the destruction of all communities. Civil and religious in every age of the world, Muhammad understood this, and it will appear from the subsequent history of his life that he made his own use of it. His countrymen were also devoted to the belief of those tenets which were known by the name of Zendikism, having a strong resemblance to the opinions of the Sadducees among the Jews, for they denied a providence, the immortality of the soul, and the resurrection from the dead, this being almost the equivalent to atheism, or no religion whatever. They were in a state very favorable to his designs, and the more easily wrought upon by his artifice and cunning. Like a piece of clean paper, they were ready to receive the first impressions that offered, and those made by Muhammad had the desired effect, for nothing almost was proof against his insinuations and addresses. And as even this translation points out, the arguments about him being a poet and a soothsayer and various things were never substantiated. By poet, somebody who, or someone who speaks of his own, a sermon giver. He wasn't, someone speaking his own doctrine. Or couldn't they have established that somehow? He was now 28 years of age, enjoying the advantages of a good exterior figure, as all historians allow, which being united to that winning mode of address he so eminently inherited from nature, and which he could, no doubt, successfully employ in the management of love affairs as well as of delusion, he gained an entire victory over the widow's heart. Khadijah, for that was her name, could no longer resist the artillery of Muhammad's accomplishments, but gave him her heart and her hand in the 40th year of her age. Had not his ambitious views been to him instead of everything else, it is not probable that he would have married a woman 12 years older than himself, but her extensive fortune opened to him the delightful prospect of reaching the completion of his fondest wishes. We draw this inference from the practice afterwards adopted by himself, always selecting such women as were younger than himself. He was espoused to his beloved Aisha when she was only 6 years of age. and she moved in when she was 9. And Abu Bakr complained for years until she was a woman, and Muhammad agreed to consummate the marriage. And by other details, other than that weak narration in Bukhari, which is from a guy who said that she was 19 and then he moved and narrated a shorter narration, left out the word 10, therefore rendering 9. All the narrations that claim that she was a preteen when it was consummated, say that, they come from that guy after he moved. And Hadith scholars determine all his narrations after that point to be weak. As females in most parts of the globe within the torrid zone arrive at womanhood at the age of 9 or 10, a woman of 40 in Arabia must be as constitutionally old as one of 60 in Britain. Well, a lot of exaggeration of that statement, and Muhammad did not accept any female under 13 nor male under 15 as even to be considered whether or not they were an adult. There's narrations that prove that too. And therefore, Surah 4 and other things would apply in that respect. Nor is it likely that Khadijah would have married her servant had not he been possessed of something which is always captivating in the eyes of those females who pay little respect to the more sublime accomplishments of the mind, and more especially if he had not been much younger than herself. Well, again, this is a baseless thing to say. If he proved himself as an astute of mind in terms of trade, and honest in character and stuff like that, wouldn't the managing of her affairs very well prove that he was accomplished of mind in that way? Muhammad's ambitious views being thus highly gratified, and his extensive influence arising from the fortune which this union brought him, conspiring to favor his design and beginning seriously to think of the most proper method of divulging his imposture. Well, nobody claims that at this time his spiritual ideas were anything other than, he talked to people and found out what they thought about things and went off by himself. Not even his friends knew. Oh yeah, he just meditates in a cave. Yeah, whatever. I don't know what they said, but it cannot be determined whether he considered himself as injured by the revolution which took place in his affairs upon the death of his father, but certain it is that he made every action of his life subservient to the obtaining of the sovereign authority over the city of Mecca, which his ancestors had so long enjoyed. But as he rightly judged that his well-known profligacy and righteousness would form insurmountable barriers in the way of his success, he resolved to lead a life of seeming sanctity and actual retirement for the space of 2 years. Yeah, there's no account whatsoever that claims this until, I guess, some of the later Christians that invented this thing. But the barrier was his opposition to alcohol, mistreating women, mistreating animals, mistreating slaves, mistreating other people. That was the barrier to most of the things. Like, you're discouraged, And didn't he say how bad the Arabian Peninsula was at this time earlier? He cannot be ignorant that the venerable and interesting title of Apostle of God, our messenger from heaven, was totally incompatible with a licentious course. So, obviously, he lived up to not doing any of that. Voluptuous. Well, in some ways, but not depraved. No one says he even had alcohol. No one says he forced women. No one, um, the shrewdness and sagacity which his countrymen possessed in a considerable degree, could not fail to dictate to them the incongruity between his wonted mode of living and a claim to inspiration. About the age of 38, he took up his almost daily residence in a solitary cave nigh to the city of Mecca, where he was favored with visions from the Almighty. When he returned home at night, he endeavored to persuade his wife of the truth of those wonderful revelations, but it seems her incredulity was at first too great to be shaken by such assertions. Well, no one knew what to make of it other than, he wasn't, it was weird, but he didn't claim to be a prophet or something at that time. She could not consider them in any other light than as the result of a disposition to play the wag. Yeah, no. But when he persisted with the utmost solemnity to vouch for their truth, she concluded him to be deranged. No, she said, regardless of what others might say, it's clear that you're not deranged, and this isn't what God wouldn't allow a devil to do this to people. And he next told her that in the aforementioned cave, sacred to the communication of important discoveries from on high, he had repeated conferences with the angel Gabriel employed by Jehovah, which is not pronounced Jehovah, Yahweh, no V, no J in actuality, to bring him down the Quran, which was to contain the religious system of doctrines and precepts that heaven designed for his countrymen. But here, again, he met with his wonted opposition, for his unbelieving spouse was determined to give credit neither to the one or the other. Again, when it got to that point, over time, because his experience built up, and finally he got something more than I see light when I meditated. She treated both as the product of a distempered brain, not apprehending the abominable purpose for which they were fabricated. I don't know where in the world some of these people get any of these things, but out of the tens of thousands of narrations, and never encountered anything like this. At this time, there was a monk residing in his house who, being privy to his design, no, there was a monk along the roadside who was, in some accounts, said to have heard about that and said, yeah, when your people learn about this, they're going to try to, drive you out and all that. And greatly assisting him to bring it to maturity, came opportunely in with his asseverations, justified Mohammed in all he advanced, and finally made a convert of the once incredulous Khadija. Well, more the other way around. Khadija, according to the Sunnis, say accepted stronger than Muhammad accepted. And this monk, no, he spoke a different language, and he nor anyone else could do anything like the Quran. So that doesn't make any sense. What will not patience and perseverance accomplish? They ought to be his companions, who is concerned in any laudable undertaking, which is the work of time, but in the support they are eminently useful. They who embark in the defense of conclusions require a command of temper, an astonishing presence of mind, as they must expect to meet with much irony and ridicule, and have to grapple with a multitude of objections for which they cannot always be prepared. And you did find that in the case of Muhammad, in propagating his message, from the first attempt to convince his wife the divinity of his message to the time which he took up the sword in its defense when they were persecuting him. In self-defense, he never allowed fighting to force the religion. And this translation itself even proves that. Who, a period of no less than 13 years, was continually exposed to scoffing and ridicule, to laughter and contempt. You know, you treat women as equals, and you treat animals. You're going to treat animals next? What about the slaves? Oh, you think slaves should be treated better than, Muhammad thought slaves should be treated better than modern companies treat employees. In a series of respects, and never fighting to make prisoners of wars. That was never the point. Self-defense, and you may stop a gang of criminals, but Yet he never once appeared to be angry, bearing all the indignities that were offered him without seeming to repine. As ungovernable sallies of passion in support of truth never fail to enter its reception in the world, so it is no less certain that even unchristian doctrine itself loses its nativity by degrees, when supported with mildness, composure, and diffidence. The Bible says to hate your family, and and talks about honor killing and ritual genital mutilation and a bunch of stuff that Islam speaks against. So that would be the deformities, right? We are not warranted in saying, from any historical information to which we have had access, that he inherited from nature this government of himself. From the most minute attention to his life, considered as a connected whole, we are led to believe that he was either of a morose or sullen, or of a hasty, passionate temper, for the propagation of his religion, as nearly as much as the error as a determined of resolution to push the advantages he had obtained. Now, as we hear from even the Quran itself, that conveying the message. I'm not here to force anybody to religion. I'm just here to convey truths about the universe and how you should relate to each other. But before he sounded the minds of his countrymen, on which depended the probability of his success, his cunning and ready wit no doubt pointed out the necessity of disguising his temper. Well, obviously upset about how people were treating him and speaking ill of God and all that. Men of an ominous disposition, who were fond of allusion and allegory, think they discover some portentous event in every accidental circumstance. As we see, as compared to the Bible, there's far less, the Quran can be taken quite literally in the whole thing. And the symbolic use is secondary and far less, you could say flowery. It's more clear in that sense. But the prophet sees the spiritual, is spiritually gifted to see the spiritual reality behind things. To people of this turn of mind, it will be a rich treat to understand that Muhammad withdrew to the cave near Mecca the very year which the tyrant Phocas granted liberty to the Bishop of Rome to assume the title of universal pastor. At the time when the Antichrist was climbing to the summit of his impious dignity in the northern, a monster was forging the chains of delusion for the southern hemisphere. Getting rumbling and tumbling at the mention of a monster, but certainly, since every Muslim believes that Jesus is literally the Christ, the Messiah, the Emmanuel of his time, and physically incarnated, with as the Bible has Jesus say, with the doctrine that he was sent to reveal, not doing away with any jot or tittle of the law, but to refurbish it in terms of his time. Antichrist doesn't apply to any Muslim in those in most of the respects that a person can say those verses, 4 verses list. The supreme being we should humbly apprehend is as much concerned in them as in other works of his hands, when by the wonderful law of vegetation one makes a tree to germinate, blossom, and bear fruit. If Mohammed went to the cave in the very year which the grant of focus was obtained, we do not see that it proves anything more than such an assertion as this, that some person or other was born in the very year, the very month, and perhaps on the very day on which the author of these pages was born. Unfortunately, however, for those who wish to make more of this story than the natural occurrence, the dates fixed to the 2 events will not bring them together. Muhammad was born in the year, in the Common Era, 571. The grant of focus is dated 606. And then Posture took up his residence, and Muhammad took up his residence in the cave at age 38. Some say he would make visits more than 2 years, and he didn't take I think some say it was a decade of, he'd make a yearly trip up there to meditate or something. Now 38 plus 571 equals 609. Wait, what? Yeah, okay, I was thinking. Okay. 606. Okay. Which carries one 3 years beyond the other. Okay, that's I was thinking a discrepancy somewhere. Yeah, because that definitely does equal 609. If he was born in the beginning of 571, the odd year will make 1 year of his age, and then it will be 571 plus 37, or 570 plus 38, 608, 2 years after the grant of focus. Finally, as the Arabs computing by lunar years, Muhammad was only 36 years old, something more than 10 months at the time of his retirement. That's almost 37. If then you add this to 570 or 571, it will give 607 or 608 nearly, none of which periods will agree with the other. If these 2 events must be made to coincide exactly in point of time, one of 3 conclusions must be admitted: either that Muhammad was not born in 571, or that the grant of focus was not obtained in 606, or that he did not retire to the cave at the age of 38. Now, if you don't believe it, you could say sincerely deluded, or he had an experience that he interpreted different than whatever. But imposture, again, he'd be like one of these New Age cult leaders that, I guess it's time to change it or something. Are pretending to be the most advanced individual while they're still figuring things out for themselves. And not really being handed it. They're just, okay, I was wrong, I was right. It doesn't work. It's not supposed to work that way with the prophet, right? But as all the above dates have the concurring testimony of the most reputed authors extant, it is the fairest and most rational conclusion that the 2 events did not happen at the same time. Muhammad, at the age of 40, after completing the period of his probation in the cell, assumed the title of Apostle of God, with none but Khadijah as the fruit of his exertions, only venturing, however, to practice on the credulity of his domestics and very near relations, since their influence, if it could be obtained, would give him additional encouragement to try his success with the public. Well, he wanted to try. He just had a few verses to start out, and then short chapters came along this. For the space of 4 years, the converts were only 9 in number, and Muhammad, of course, condemned the founders of new religions. This gloomy prospect required a degree of patience too big for the shock of disappointment, and here we beseech all zealous, hot-headed Christians to remember that his having obtained so few proselytes for such a length of time can be no proof, abstractly considered, of the badness of his cause. For even truth itself, when it is entirely new, we receive at first with shyness and suspicion. We suspect thus because we never wish to refute error but by solid arguments, by making up stuff and trying to say, well, if one person got freedom, maybe Satan put in an antichrist. Yeah, that's solid proof right there. And ill nature, slandering him and his wife and stuff like this. It's like, why not just say, he differed with Christian morality. There's people who say the 630 contradictions between the Quran and the Bible versus like over 1,300 in any one version of the Bible with itself. That, the so-called ill nature, weakness, or that sort of thing. You think that's where they would make their arguments from, but no. We shall presently find him without the pitiful subterfuge, our shift, our evasion. You find that he was steadfast, and unlike philosophers that changed their mind, he, once he said this is the Quran, that was it. He never had a contradictory doctrine as difference to Paul, right? Recollecting the recluse and austere life he had led in the cave, and expecting to feel the good effects of it from the reputation for sanctity which it had probably acquired him, he opened his teachings to the people. At the age of 44, the leading ideas of all his discourses were that God is one, that he himself was the prophet of God sent to declare his will to men, and that they who affirm the Almighty to have sons or daughters are charged with impiety and ought to be detested. And see, the opposition to the professional priests, the opposition to the polytheism, and other such things were actually what this so-called wickedness and imposture claims were all about.